Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to be exploring a really familiar story, but we're looking at it through a completely different lens. Because if you think you know the parable of the talents from the book of Matthew, well, you might find, just like I did, that there's actually a massive cosmic drama hiding right there in plain sight. We aren't just looking at some simple story about money or, smart investing. We are stepping into a profound narrative about humanity's original purpose, the unseen heavenly courtroom, and the ultimate return of the king. Okay, let's dive into this. For centuries, our modern language has basically conditioned us to hear the word talent and immediately think of natural abilities, like playing the piano or literal financial wealth. But what if we've been reading it way too small? In the context of this cosmic kingdom, these talents actually represent everything the ascended king entrusts to his people. We're talking truth, relationships, spiritual gifts, the gospel itself, and the very presence of God. It's all about kingdom capital and what we do with it while the king is away. But this brings us to a pretty massive pitfall, a concept known as the theology of sterile preservation. It turns out this is the belief that stewardship simply means avoiding risk. It's the safe, passive protection of what God has given us. But confusing passive safety with true obedience is actually a devastating form of covenant failure. God didn't entrust his kingdom to us just so we could lock it away in a glass case. He expects those divine gifts to be actively cultivated and multiplied. To truly grasp this, we have to zoom out and look at the grand Eden restoration concept. It's like a giant puzzle. It starts all the way back in Eden, where humanity was first entrusted with delegated dominion over creation. Today, right now in the church age, we're in this period of stewardship, acting as the king's representatives. Next comes the second coming, which brings accountability. And finally, the new creation, where unhindered communion is fully restored. So faithful stewardship today is actually the recovery of humanity's original Genesis calling. That brings us to Section 1, the true meaning of stewardship, which is all about extending God's ordered rule. To really get this, we have to completely rethink what it means to be a steward. The parable lays out 4 foundational realities of the king's delegation. First, the king intentionally departs. Second, the servants remain here on earth. Third, the king's massive resources are entrusted to them. And fourth, a future accounting is absolutely certain. We aren't just meant to sit around twiddling our thumbs waiting for the king to return. The Christian life is a calling to actively extend God's ordered rule into the world. We are literally his vice-regents. The goal isn't just to govern a bunch of passive subjects, it's to develop mature sons and daughters who actively participate in his reign. Moving right along to Section 2, the 2 servant archetypes, and how perception completely shapes reality. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that when we look closer at the servants themselves, we find these deep psychological truths. A servant's internal perception of the master entirely dictates their external reality. Notice the serpent pattern here. The third servant in the story, the guy who buried his talent in the dirt, claims his master is a hard man. This directly echoes the serpent in Eden, who insinuated that God was holding out on them and lacked goodness. It's a fundamentally distorted perception of God's character. It replaces covenant trust with defensive, anxious fear, and that leads directly to withdrawal and self-protection. When we compare the 2 types of servants, we see 2 entirely different economies at play. On the left, we have a faith economy. The faithful servants accurately perceive the master's generosity, which naturally leads to confident obedience, active participation, and real kingdom expansion. But on the right, we've got a fear economy. The third servant is operating out of this totally distorted perception. Fear literally narrows his perceived possibilities. It blinds him to any faithful alternatives, contracts his entire life, and just paralyzes his active participation. We can actually map out this cascading failure step by step. It's like a chain reaction. It all starts with step 1, a distorted perception of God. That bad theology directly produces step 2, paralyzing fear. Fear then dictates step 3, sterile preservation, literally burying the talent in the dirt, which ultimately results in step 4, covenant failure and exile. So fear isn't just a fleeting emotion here. It's a profound theological response rooted in a totally false image of the king. All right, let's look at Section 3, the kingdom economics principle, focusing on proportional faithfulness. So how does the returning king actually evaluate his stewards and the dominion he delegated to them? And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how the master judges. Look at the top row. The servant given 5 talents gains 5, and the master says, "Enter the master's joy." But look at the second row.
The servant entrusted with 2 talents gains 2. And guess what? He receives the exact same commendation, the exact same promotion, and the exact same invitation into the master's joy. Nothing is reduced. The reward is identical.
So the crucial point is this. God evaluates believers based on proportional faithfulness to their assigned capacity, not on some comparative absolute achievement. He doesn't demand identical returns because, well, he didn't distribute identical resources in the first place. This perfectly impartial justice is incredibly freeing. It entirely eliminates any need for pride or envy or constant comparison with others. Hidden obedience matters just as much as huge public success, as long as it's faithful to the trust you were given.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 4, the Cosmic King Returns, stepping into a heavenly courtroom. As we reach the climax of this explainer, we really need to zoom out to the macro-level cosmic reality here. When the master returns, he utters these iconic words, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord." Listen, this isn't just some middle management boss giving an employee a year-end bonus. No way. This is an epic, heavenly courtroom scene. The king has returned to his domain, and a massive cosmic judgment event is taking place, where he officially reclaims his territory. In this heavenly courtroom, specific judicial actions actually occur. First, the evidence of stewardship is examined. Second, a definitive verdict is pronounced. You're either good and faithful or wicked and lazy. And third, authority is officially reassigned. The earthly accounting of these servants perfectly mirrors a heavenly judicial reality, where the king is evaluating the administration of his entire cosmic kingdom. Which leads us to a pretty sobering judicial redistribution. It highlights a really tough truth. Stewardship neglected is stewardship removed. The master literally takes the 1 talent from the fearful servant and hands it over to the one with 10. Why? Because the kingdom never, ever allows entrusted resources to remain permanently sterile. God's purposes simply won't be frustrated by one person's unfaithfulness. He just transfers the privilege of participation over to a faithful steward so the mission can continue. Let's move to and see how this builds into the ultimate goal of humanity. Look at this pathway to the new creation. It starts with an accurate perception of God's goodness. That fuels confident obedience, which naturally leads to faithful multiplication of what He's entrusted to us. And it all culminates in restored communion. Faithful stewardship is literally how humanity is invited back into the divine, unhindered joy and presence of the Master that was originally lost way back in Eden. Which leaves us with a deeply personal question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer today. When the cosmic king finally returns to settle accounts, what exactly will he find you doing? Will he find you faithfully expanding his ordered rule with whatever he happens to have placed in your hands? Or will he find that you've buried your cosmic calling in the dirt of fear? The choice and the stewardship is entirely yours.